Well, good evening. Welcome to another center stage here at Beth Israel, the West Temple. Tonight we talk about public radio, public television in Northeast Ohio. A wonderful guest, very knowledgeable, working at the station and be able to answer all the questions I think we all have. Could you give us your name, Mike?
Sure. My name is Mike Shafarenko.
And Mike, what do you do for a living, sir?
I am the Chief Experience Officer at Ideastream Public Media.
And what does an experience officer do?
Well, it's actually a unique position. There are not many, in public media there are no chief experience officers, but
wow.
I oversee human resources and our digital efforts. And the idea is that I am as focused on the end experience for users of our products and services as I am on our internal users, our staff, largely, and how the two connect, how we change internal systems and dynamics and culture to then influence the product we produce for people like you in the community.
And what were the steps to becoming an experience officer for you professionally?
My career has been very non-linear. I came to Cleveland in 2001 to attend Case Western Reserve University.
From what city?
St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh my gosh.
So I grew up in St. Louis and came here to study in my undergraduate. I got a psychology degree, then I worked in human resources and economic development, and then a philanthropic group called the Fund for Our Economic Future. Then I ran a startup online engagement platform called Civic Commons, and then eventually that was absorbed by Ideastream, which is how I joined Ideastream about 9 years ago. So very non-linear path to get there.
So when we say Ideastream, in your mind, what does that mean? Who does that, what kind of product does Ideastream cover and provide to the public?
Ideastream provides, in many ways, kind of almost like a utility of information and news to public radio listeners, public television viewers, and in our case, also classical radio listeners. So the products range from kids programming on WVIZ PBS to documentaries on WVIZ PBS and adult shows like Downton Abbey and things like that, to public radio programming, All Things Considered, and Morning Edition, which are the main flag, the two tentpole news programs, and then all the other programming in between. So we serve a very wide, diverse range of needs and communities.
Is it common for a municipality or an area to have everything under one umbrella, television and radio and classical?
No, it's actually quite uncommon. Just by the way many public media stations formed back whenever they were formed, usually decades ago, it was really sort of an innovation that in Cleveland, the public radio station and the public television station merged and created this new umbrella called Ideastream.
And when was that?
That was around 2001.
Okay,
that they came together. So they were operating separately before that, but the leaders at the time kind of had this enlightened vision that together they could achieve more than by kind of going it separately. So it was, in many ways, unprecedented in the public media system. I mean, there are other what we call joint licensees. That means you are a licensee of, let's say, NPR, you are a licensee of PBS. And so they're joint licensees, but usually they were formed kind of originally that way. It's uncommon for mergers to occur, for any number of reasons you might imagine around the politics of merging or the finances of merging, or how do you bring two boards together, who has the control. So there's lots of things to be worked out, but in 2001 they were able to do that. And then I don't remember exactly, maybe 2009, 2010 is when WCLV, the classical radio station, joined.
Yes.
When the owners sold the station and then donated the station then to Ideastream to run as a public good for classical music.
And then we add in what happened just over a month ago.
Sure.
Where Northeast Ohio had two, what I would believe to be two totally separate institutions with some comparable programming merged together as well. How long of a process was that?
That depends on who you ask. Some people involved with Ideastream for many years would say this has been a 20-year conversation.
Oh my gosh.
You just numerous attempts by various parties over the years to say, look, does it make sense for us to work together to serve the community, then essentially to provide 90% of the same programming and serve more or less the same audience? and both expending the dollars to, do the fundraising and do everything we have to do for ultimately, So those conversations were had, and then it just kind of, I think the right pieces fell into place, the right leaders came together, and really saw a vision for how we could actually do it together. And so once that happened, then it was about a year of discussions and negotiations to just work out the details of what's going to happen, and who's going to control or operate what. And at the end of the day, Kent State University still owns the license to the station.
Okay.
And we, as Ideastream Public Media, operate the station. So we're the operators, but technically it is still Kent State University's property, if that makes sense.
Huh. And was KSU on air prior to CPN?
It was. I don't remember, don't quote me on the dates, but I think KSU started maybe 70 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
As a station,
wow.
yeah. And WCPN is maybe 35 years old, so it was almost 35 years after WKSU had started that the Cleveland, Cleveland market got its own license, community license, to operate a public radio station. Kent State, of course, is a university licensee. These are all technical details. Even I don't really understand fully as far as what the differentiation is, but other than the governance. So under a university licensee, they don't have their own board, for example. It's the board of the university that kind of, and other machinations within the university that sort of govern how the station is run. As a community licensee, we are governed by a group of community leaders, which is our board, and then obviously our management and staff from there.
Well, that would be could be a potentially significant difference between so-called municipal run station and one based upon the university system itself.
I have to believe so, because a university, especially as large as Kent State University, I mean, they have so much going on. They have so many different priorities, and I think they were very good to their station. They supported it, but our ability, because that is our business. We're not in the business of academia. We're in the business of public media. We have kind of the unique ability to be more focused, to bring in more resources specifically for what we're doing in public media. So I think a lot of the people around the table felt it just made a lot of sense to come together.
So when you have this coming together, does the board no longer have any attachment to the university public, or is it just all private? The people that were here already. How did that leadership get created in your merger?
So what happened is we wrote into the agreement that the president of the university would be on the Ideastream board. So he, in this case, it's a he, Todd Dyken. Dr. Todd Dyken is now a board member of Ideastream Public Media to continue to represent kind of the university's interests.
Yeah.
Both of our stations actually have what's called a community advisory board or council. So it's a non-governing board, but they're made up of individuals throughout our coverage area. So a more sort of geographic representation of people that kind of tell us what's going on in their communities and give us feedback on our programming and help us do some engagement in different communities and things like that. So we actually combine those two together, and so our two community advisory boards are now one. And so I don't remember exactly how many people. It's probably like 40 people or something like that between the two stations, again, just to bring in that continuity of the communities we represent and the interests that are, of our communities and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how we brought in, and fused that together between the president serving on the governing board and then combining the two community advisory boards together.
So radio runs 24/7.
It does.
And television runs 24/7.
It does.
Let's take the TV side first. How much of the television is live, actually live, happening when it's on the air? Do you know?
I actually do not. I mean, 95% of the programming on WVIZ is national, meaning we're taking either a live feed, or we're taking recorded programming. I honestly couldn't tell you. I haven't been that close to that side of the operation to know if, news programs like PBS NewsHour, is that happening right then when you're watching it? I think so. At 6 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
I think it's happening right at that time. But I couldn't tell you exactly how much is live. And from our end, the only thing live we do or have done is like pledge programming.
Yes.
So when our people from our station go on and say, "Don't you love this program? Will you help support it?" So some of that is live, or has been in the past. Because of the pandemic, we haven't been doing a whole lot of in-studio production or live production.
And I didn't, I'll just ask the question, live programming, television side on local issues, there isn't much, so I don't know if it's pandemic related or not, you don't see that much. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement. You know, we used to have the Dick Fagler show, and then we had a show called Ideas, which covered about a half hour of daily news. But at the end of the day, it just it's very hard business to be in.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so commercial stations, I think, you know, they're still able to do it because they still have enough advertising revenue and other sources of revenue flowing in to do it. Mm-hmm. But for us to do it where we don't have the ability to do advertising, we do underwriting, but it's not the same.
Not the same.
You're not interrupted every 30 seconds with a commercial or something. So we have to raise philanthropic funds, we have to get other funding. And so from an economic standpoint, it was difficult to keep that going. And also just there wasn't a tremendous demand. I mean, there was people who watched it, but it wasn't overwhelming to the point that we could really justify continuing, you know, to do it and switch our time and attention elsewhere in service to the community. You know, at any given time, we have to make trade-offs and decisions about how to use the dollars, the tax dollars, but also the donation dollars of members and others.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very judicious about, you know, how we're spending our time.
So on the radio side, is that almost always live?
That, yes. I think some of the evening programming is not. So some of the recorded shows are not. I don't know exactly when they're recorded. Yeah. Or weekend programming, except for maybe like Morning Edition or things like, or All Things Considered is not live. So any, you know, kind of, again, recorded shows.
Yeah, there's some ethnic programming on Sundays.
Yeah.
That would generally be recorded, you think?
Those were usually pre-recorded.
They are pre-recorded.
A lot of them were pre-recorded. Now, with the merger, a lot of that we've actually moved them to one of our HD channels. So the way folks can access, you know, different ethnic programming is now through our HD channels, because we had to make some changes by virtue of merging the programming of WCPN and WKSU. So
it's a two-part question. Do you know how many people are watching and listening?
We do. We get we have rating systems, Nielsen rating systems, and other systems and we get regular reports. So I want to say on now WKSU, probably roughly 140, 150,000 people listen a week.
Okay.
And on WVIZ, we measure in households, which is different than individuals. So about 300,000 households watch. Wow. So if you consider that a household has, let's say, 2.5 people in it, or whatever the average is, you start to get a sense of sort of magnitude of, you know, that television is pretty widely used across Northeast Ohio, and then public radio is a little more niche as far as the people who are listening to it.
And do you know, can you look back to, let's just say 2015, 2016, do you see growth? Or do you see the number down, or a little bit of both? What can you tell us about that?
Well, a lot certainly depends on the news cycle for us. And so during the Trump presidency, a lot of our ratings were sky high. You know, there was just a you know, I mean, I think it's probably obvious, you know, that there was just so much interest in the daily outrage, whatever the outrage may have been, that it just really, there was a lot of listening. Then there was some Judge Kavanaugh hearings, which brought a lot of attention, and then certainly all that then rolled into the new election of President Biden, and now we have actually before that the pandemic started, so we had this kind of period of sharp interest based on the news cycle. So there was more listening, more tuning in, more digital usage, you know, or through computers and smart speakers and phones and things like that. But now we're starting to see a little bit of a leveling off, you know, for any number of reasons. You know, the pandemic is hopefully an endemic now, and so there's not constant daily news about, you know, what you need to know about the pandemic, and things in politics, while volatile, are not quite so volatile as to generate as much interest, I should say.
And how much do you know about your listeners? Do you know age, income, political persuasion, just to use 3. Do you know that? Did you guys get that information as well?
We do, and we also have a membership, so that kind of is a little bit of a proxy for, we do not ask people their political affiliation. That's really none of our business, but, the majority of our audience is white, educated, working to upper middle class, so we do know that, that kind of information, and usually about 40 and older, we know that as well.
So that is not a microcosm of the state of Ohio, certainly. It might not even be a microcosm of Northeast Ohio. Is there a goal to enlarge your audience within that sphere, or is there a goal to try to get beyond what you just mentioned as being your audience?
That's a great question, because it's sort of this almost existential dilemma. On one hand, you have those that are passionate for what you do, and they listen and they support you financially. But at the end of the day, we're a service-based organization. We aim and strive to, serve people of all walks of life to the best of our ability. And so it does come down, again, a lot to the resources we can bring to bear to doing so. So we try as best we can to serve different audiences, but there is a kind of a core audience at the end of the day. But a lot of the conversation is about being more diverse, serving more diverse, both age and ethnic background and race and sexual orientation. So there's a lot of conversation across public media for how can we truly live up to our kind of name, public media, if in fact we're only serving kind of this core group. So it's definitely a conundrum.
It's and you have to look out into the future as well.
You do, and that's a debate too. How do we engage younger people? So with the theory, I suppose, is if you engage younger people, they'll stay with you into their. I guess I'm of a personal mindset as we serve adults of today and tomorrow, meaning there's people, when you reach a certain life stage, you start to care about certain things. When I was in college, I didn't listen to NPR because I was worried about college things. When I graduated college and I had to pay rent and I had to pay taxes and I had to do all the adult things, then the things I was hearing on NPR started to be more relevant to my life. And so, again, there's that kind of ongoing debate of, well, we need to serve younger people, they'll become our future. Well, maybe we just need to always be serving adults at a certain starting point of their, in their lives, in their 20s or late 20s, when the kind of information we're sharing is applicable and relevant to their lives.
So, and a person who still listens to a car radio rather than Spotify, etc., NPR's free.
It is.
Turn on your radio, there it is.
Yep.
On the television side, is it still free for the public to watch generally?
Yes.
It is still free to watch?
Yeah. I mean, so long as you have, the right equipment, the bunny ears, or, we call it over the air. So literally, there's particles in the air that are coming into your antenna on your television set, and you're picking up from the air. But, we're seeing, I think, like many companies, that cord cutting, people are cutting their cable and turning to different, Hulu services or other on-demand services like that some of them which offer what in our industry we call tiny bundles, tiny package bundles of channels. So instead of, the full array of 300, you get the top 50 or whatever. So they call them tiny bundles. And so, we're, as public media, trying to figure out our way out in that world as well.
Wow.
Between what's on air and then what's on demand, and how do we compete with the likes of Netflix. So we have a system as public media, not Ideastream, but all of public media, called Passport. I don't know if you've heard of it, but for those who are members of our organizations across the country, at $60 a year.
Right, $5 a month.
$5 a month, $6 a year or more.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your contribution. You can access Passport, and it's an on-demand system. You can watch most PBS programming anytime, anywhere, so long as you have the device to do it. But it's this ongoing, but we can't really compete with Netflix because, for example, they spent $5 billion on content last fiscal year. Public media PBS spent $50 million. So $50 million on programming, $5 billion. I mean, my hand doesn't go high enough to represent the difference. And, and obviously we're non-commercial. We're not trying to compete in a commercial sense. but we are trying to compete for time and attention, you know, to our programming, to the quality, to the educational value, to all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I said, you have Netflix and HBO and Apple now that are also creating beautiful, you know, nature documentaries and all sorts of things that used to be kind of uniquely public media.
Yeah.
So it's this really interesting space to figure out, when you have this new competition in this way, what purpose do you continue to serve? Do you do something different? Do you double, you know, to your question earlier, do you double down on what you already are known for? And so it's this real interesting time to kind of figure all that out, probably over the next 5 to 10 years.
On the radio side, I'm just going to guess that the numbers are higher, what we'll call drive time or old-fashioned drive time. Is that fair?
Yes, between the morning drive and the afternoon drive, yes. The afternoon drive is the highest, usually, or has been.
Afternoon's higher than the morning?
Yes, I believe so. I hope folks at the station don't don't kill me. I may have that backwards, and maybe the other way around.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, our numbers we see go up during, you know, what is it, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then the same kind of peak occurs in that 4 to, I want to say, 8 p.m. Range as well.
And how did the pandemic itself affect those particular sets of numbers?
Well, they certainly brought them down. I can't tell you by how much. I don't have percentages or anything like that. But the phenomenon of driving or drive time ceased to exist, because with everything locked down, many offices sending their workers to work remotely, pretty much for 2 years now, the concept of drive time kind of evaporated. And so, again, I can't tell you, not having the data in front of me, exactly how the disbursement of our audience.
Sure.
But we certainly saw a huge increase in the use of digital devices. So if you're driving, you're listening to your car radio. If you're sitting at home and you don't have a radio, you might be listening through your computer, through a smart speaker, through your phone, and those are all obviously digital devices. And so we saw a huge increase in the use of digital devices, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a natural progression of the way all of us, right, are using media and content these days. And so if anything, it accelerated some already steady progression in that regard. It just kind of accelerated people's adoption of those different devices and platforms.
How many people work on each side? If we call radio one side, TV the other, how big an organization are you?
We don't split them. We consider all of ourselves Ideastream public media employees. We have about 150 people.
Wow.
Now, something I forgot to say at the very beginning was we do have a whole operation in Columbus that operates the Ohio Government Television. So the Ohio channel, sort of the Ohio C-SPAN, if you will. So there's probably a group of 30 there that do all the legislative sessions and the Supreme Court sessions and the congressional sessions and the various finance and these committees and those committees and that committee. So they are a part of us as well. And then we also operate the State House News Bureau, which covers the news of the State House as well. And those folks are in Columbus as well.
So how many would be downtown at 13th and Euclid, give or take?
About 120.
Wow.
About 120 employees. Yeah.
Wow. And there is those people. Is all the production handled right there? All the engineering? I mean, that's it? That's where the programs are created and sent out to the world? How does that work? I guess is my non-professional question.
Sure, the answer is nuanced. So national programming is produced, anywhere, Boston, Washington D.C., wherever, New York, and then through various technological pipes comes into our systems, and then we schedule them within our systems, and then they're pushed out, at certain times. There's some obviously production that happens locally. Anytime you hear our hosts on the radio side, good morning, I'm Mike Shafarenko, this is All Things Considered or whatever. This is Morning Edition if it's the morning. I keep getting them mixed up. That's all live. That's all happening live. They're pushing the buttons right there and then to tell you the weather, to tell you the traffic, and that's all happening live. So I don't know for percentage basis what's live and what's not, or what's originated from the Idea Center, but all of our systems are sort of central at the Idea Center at Playhouse Square. And then again, it's by virtue of whether it's acquired programming from somewhere else or if it's of our origin, but it's all going into that system regardless and being pushed out, And then our antennas are not downtown. They're in one's in Lorraine and one's in Parma, depending on our station. So it's not necessarily even the transmission isn't necessarily from downtown Cleveland. It's where our towers, we have towers that we maintain that are in other parts of Northeast Ohio.
And that type of employee base and that type of expenditure, what type of budget does your company have?
We are about a $26 million annual,
Wow.
26 million annual budget, operating budget.
That's a growth number from 5 years ago, do you think?
It is somewhat. Some of it's also by virtue of merging with WKSU as well and taking on some of those operations.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, we were probably a $22 million operation, somewhere around there. So we've grown either by virtue of adding members or other revenue sources, or like I said, the merger with WKSU has also brought in a different kind of operating budget.
You just mentioned bringing things in from a different station. I think Here and Now it's out of Boston.
That's right.
Well, how does this Cleveland radio channel get the right to broadcast a program that starts in a different city? How does that work?
That's all negotiated. I mean, it's all negotiated contracts of acquisition. We call it acquired programming. So we acquire it,
programming,
and we have to not only pay but also do certain things, say certain things to acknowledge Here and Now or whatever, however it needs to happen. So there's a lot of but it's purchased. So we literally pay dues. We pay dues to NPR to be a member station, which then gives us the license to air their programming. We could choose to not be an NPR station. We could choose to do public radio of some other flavor that isn't NPR and spend that money in other ways. But we spend that $1 or $1 million+ a year just NPR to be able to run all that NPR programming, all their news, all their flagpole programs, podcasts, everything.
And so for our station, Northeast Ohio station, WKSU, where does the $26 million come from to run that budget?
That's a very good question. We are probably one of the more diverse media sources, public media in general, and Ideastream, I would say, almost in particular. We have governmental sources, obviously, from appropriations from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So every public media station gets some kind of appropriation based on its other revenue and its other size and its market and all these kinds of things. But that is actually a fraction of our overall budget. The largest portion of our revenue comes from donations, individual members' donations.
Is that right?
Yep. We have, now that we've merged with WKSU, if I round up, we have 50,000 members.
Oh my gosh.
Between all the stations we operate. And so we rely heavily, and we are glad to rely heavily on individual members of the public that support what we do. So I'll come back to that in a second. We have philanthropic resources, various foundation grants and things that fund different programs that we do. Underwriting revenue, which is what we call advertising, but there's nuances to how we can do it. We can't actually sell anything. It's more public information about the Cleveland Orchestra having a concert or Cleveland State University having an event or whatever the case might be. So it's not advertising, but we do have underwriting as another source of revenue. State government appropriations for the Ohio Government Television Service that I told you about. So it's part of the state legislative budget to allocate a certain amount to the Ohio Government Television to cover their legislative sessions.
Wow.
So there's a lot of different, I want to say there's 14 different sources of revenue. Not all equal in proportion, but there's 14 different sources. And I don't mean donors, I mean like types of flowing into Ideastream to make up that $26 million budget.
So when somebody pays as small as $60 a year, what percentage of that actually, does it all stay here? The 50,000 people who make a donation, does that money all stay with Ideastream?
It does, but it's then, we then have to determine how to spend it, and so some of it is spent on that national programming, if you will, but we don't I guess we don't slice it up that way. We don't think, oh, okay, this percentage of your donation goes here, 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 and there.
Yeah,
We just see
yeah.
we have an overall pot of
Yeah.
funds, and then we say, okay, well, we need to pay $1 million in dues to NPR to acquire their programming. We need to pay whatever, dollars to PBS to acquire their programming, and then all the staffing and, other things that we do. So I couldn't tell you exactly how your donation is dispersed.
No, I understand.
But
it-
but it's to cover everything that we do.
at least the public knows it stays here.
Right, it's not siphoned off to NPR or anything, or PBS
Yeah.
themselves. That's the sort of idea of a membership-based system. And what I mean, not you as a member, meaning we as stations are members of NPR.
Got it.
And the board of NPR or the board of PBS is made up of member station general managers or CEOs.
Wow.
So it acts like the governing body
Yeah.
of this membership-based organization. So, and then PBS and NPR have to facilitate that governing body and do things that accommodate the needs of stations in, small town USA to major metropolis Boston. And so it's an interesting, it's like Congress, right?
Yeah.
You have districts that represent however many, thousands
Yes.
of people, and districts that represent hundreds of thousands of people. And so how do you find the right balance to accommodate all those different interests across the country? So they do their best.
So let's change to a different issue, and that is the subjects, the subject matter. What steps does your organization take to make sure that your product isn't slanted one degree, one side or the other, or a third or a fourth side in the debate?
There's a lot of effort given to, we have a code of editorial integrity that we annually review with all of our reporters, and they sign and agree to, and other sort of policies that speak to sort of remaining neutral and objective and to the best of our ability. So there's a lot that goes into sort of the sausage making to maintain that we're trying, we're doing our best, again, to cover different issues. But more often than not, our local coverage, there isn't a slant to be had, because local news more often than not is just what's going on in your community, what's your local council voting on, or what the mayor said or did, or some other issues. So it's rare that we have to enter into that fray of taking a side or another, but it's hard. It's very hard, and sometimes I think public media gets the perception of being liberally biased. And I think some of that just has to do with the nature of the stories they choose to tell and how they choose to tell them. I don't think they intend, or we intend, to be liberal per se, but when we tell more human interest stories or from the perspective of individuals, and we look to a more diverse sort of kaleidoscope of our community, oh, well, you're being more liberal by doing that. Well, I guess we're just covering the world around us as we see it, and to the best of our ability try not to inject bias. And I think some reports have actually been done, or academic studies, that if you don't already have a perception that public media is liberal, that it is found to be the most neutral, the most objective of the media that exists.
So the one issue that I keep hearing about, keep reading about, and keep watching about between the last election and now, we have one coming up in 7 months, at a local level, are the school boards.
Mm-hmm.
And the books, and the list of books, and all the things that you can and can't talk about. In Florida, the things you can't say. What is the responsibility of a local news organization to that type of issue?
I do have to inject that I'm not on the editorial side of our business, so it's largely my experience in public media, but not my professional judgment, because that's not my background. But I think our responsibility is to cover what's going on. So if the Rocky River School District, for example, is debating having critical race theory in their curriculum, we go and cover that's something they're debating.
Yeah.
And then we may have a call-in show. Well, we have a call-in show called Sound of Ideas every day at 9 o'clock.
Yes.
Where we might go into, maybe a little bit more depth of the different sides of the issue, and bring in people who are supportive of it or are against it to kind of explain their views and why they are for it or why they're against it. So our job is to tell you what's going on, and then offer perspective on, hopefully both sides or maybe even multiple sides of the issue. And again, we try to do our best to do just that.
And Sound of Ideas is locally produced live programming with call-in options. Is that the only one that has all three of those characteristics on the radio?
Yes, for us at Ideastream it is. Yeah.
And is it somewhat normal in all the different areas that 1 hour 9 to 10 is available to local?
Not necessarily. That's a choice we make. That's a choice we've made, and we can put it anywhere in the schedule that we choose. We have had some discourse about maybe putting it in the evenings, that it might attract a different kind of listener or different listeners. But for now, and for as long as I've worked there, which is going on, it's 9 years, it's been at 9 o'clock, kind of very steadily.
And the people who, let's say, don't listen to you regularly, who believe what you mentioned before may have a slant to the left or to the blue side, do you as an institution hear from them on that issue? Do they take it to some type of airway to complain?
Yeah, they have different, everyone has different means of communicating their, either pleasure or displeasure with what we do. They email us, they write us letters, they call us, they voice it in other forums and, political ways, when every year the Congress has to set the budget, it's always a risk that public media gets, might be defunded or something like that. Which hasn't happened in a very, ever. Mm-hmm. Is always there, depending on the presidency or who controls the Congress and so on. So, yeah, we certainly hear from them, and our contention is we're trying to tell it how it is. We're not intentionally, we're not MSNBC, we're not Fox News, we're not trying to drive a narrative to bring in viewers or to bring in listeners. We are, again, trying to represent and reflect the kaleidoscope of our local communities, the national community, the international community. So,
the word media, when we were kids, it was ABC, NBC, CBS, public television, and just in our lifetime, there's an explosion of available media. And then we get the term social media. So let's start with Facebook. What type of role does Facebook have in what your product looks like? Is there a way to define that?
What our product looks like? We do have some discussion of what we call developing content that's platform intentional. And what I mean by that is even among the social media platforms, there's different cultures. So Facebook actually has kind of now an older culture. You're not going to find a lot of 15-year-olds on Facebook. They think it's for older people. And so there's a kind of one culture. Twitter has a different culture, which is more argumentative, debate-like, bombastic. And Instagram is yet another different kind of culture, which is more sort of, visually oriented and short video or whatever. And so it's become much more difficult industry to operate in, because if you do want to be intentional about creating content that is, again, well received within that platform, it's within the culture of that platform.
Yes.
It's forced us as public media writ large, not just Ideastream, to rethink, well, how much of it can we even do meaningfully, and how much of it should we be doing? Yes, there's a billion people on all of them, but that doesn't mean that even in our market, there's enough, there for us to invest meaningful resources into it. So a lot of what we do on those platforms is largely is the web story of a radio story. So we have a radio story, our reporters write it into a web form that goes on our website, and then that is what we publish to a Facebook or a Twitter or Instagram. And we're at the behest of their algorithms, right? So for example, 15,000 people follow us on Facebook. But not all 15,000 people see everything we post every day, because the algorithm of Facebook is really if you follow lots of things, if you saw everything you followed posted, you'd never use Facebook because you'd be in arrest and just overwhelmed at the quantity. So Facebook has algorithms running based on things you've liked or clicked or who you're friends
Sure,
with.
of course.
That's feeding you things that to the best of its algorithmic ability is organized around your life and your interests. So for that reason, it's not like we're reaching 15,000 people. We're reaching some fraction of that with every post that we make, 500, maybe 1,000 people. And so we have to not think of it as a broadcast platform that when we open up the airwaves and reach, again, 150,000 people a week, it's a very different thing on social media and Facebook in general.
That's a perfect answer, Mike. I think that we are what we are, they operate. We don't have to be in sync with them 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. I was reading something. How is it that maybe you and your wife are talking about, I don't know, buying new siding or something, and suddenly you're seeing siding, ads in your Facebook. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of it is based on the systems knowing who you're in proximity to and what those people are doing. So it makes assumptions, again, algorithmic assumptions, that if you're in the proximity of this person who Facebook knows is your wife or your child or whoever it is, and they're looking up something, then they assume that you then are part of that conversation as well. My wife started looking up pizza ovens, for the summer for outdoor pizza cooking. Suddenly my feed is full of pizza oven. Like, what's going on? I'm not looking up pizza ovens, but it's that kind of dynamic where, again, they're trying to optimize to what they think is in your immediate interest or your immediate worldview based on the proximity of who you're with or what location you're in. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And of course, for media companies, we are trying to understand how it all works so we can get the news and information we produce out to as many people as we can. So it's a constant game. It's a constant sort of chicken egg game of, we think we figured it out, now we're reaching more people. Facebook, because they're a public company, but they can do what they want. They change their algorithms, and now they're going to push you just this kind of content or this kind of information. Yeah. So that too then gives, I would say, media or public media pause as to how much do we invest in these platforms when at their whim they can change. And so we're not hiring up 20 Facebook producers or 20, and the companies that have done that unfortunately have failed. Most of them have failed. Now they're usually digital startups that sort of optimize for certain platforms, and when those platforms change how they operate, those startups are left without a business to run.
And from my perspective, it's an issue also of attention span. The lookup on Facebook or the lookup on all the other different social medias could take 45 seconds, whereas they may listen to your radio show for an hour if they're stuck in traffic longer. They may watch the news for an hour on TV. It's a different type of attention. Maybe that also defines who your listeners are, the little older, who have more available time to concentrate on what you guys have decided is important. Is that fair?
It could be a matter of time. It could be a matter of also perspective and interest in depth of an issue. So the social media, I think, platforms are good for sort of getting a large quantity of news quickly, just by virtue of reading headlines and sort of absorbing, the vast array of news on any given day. But then if you listen to something or you watch something, you're really tuned into its depth. You are, as a consumer, are interested in learning more, or unpacking the nuances, or getting more context for something. So I don't know if it's a matter of age, so it's just a matter of user preference. And so there could be young users that love context and want to know all about how something came to be, and there could be older users that don't have a large attention span and just want very quick. So we try we do our best to focus on what we call psychographics and less so demographics.
Psychographics. Tell us what that is.
Psychographics is understanding people's beliefs, interests, and values, and being agnostic necessarily to their demographics. Meaning, if we were to take a a pool of 1,000 people, and they're very diverse. They're diverse in age, they're diverse in political affiliation, they're diverse in ethnicity and race and all those things. And we start asking them questions about what they value or how they use news or whatever, then certain things start to bubble to the top. And you start to see that even across this very diverse group of people, there are some shared sentiments. There's some shared values. There's some shared beliefs. And so we're inclined to figure out how to better serve people of similar, like I said, beliefs and characteristics and values with respect to their consumption of news and information than, you know, being very hyper-focused on one or another demographic, because it's becoming less and less, I think, important. Older demographic, I think, the key distinction is they have more disposable income. So that's maybe the key distinction of the if we were to look at things demographically, most of our members skew older because their kids are out of college and they have the $60 a year or whatever, to support us. But from a programming standpoint, again, we're trying to really look at psychographics so that our news and information is hitting those that, again, have similar kind of news consumption, news interests. And I don't mean topical interest, I mean just the level of depth that they want, or the level of context or nuance that they want.
So, in essence, you're, of course, a news organization, but not a commercial as in Channel 3, 5, and 8.
Right.
And I would guess that the news, as we want to define it, directs what the day will be like. That sometime in the morning somebody says, okay, this is what we need to work on today.
Sure.
How big of a decision-making group is it that decides for your organizations what we're going to spend our time on today?
Well, we have various levels of editors. We have an executive editor, we have 2 news directors, we have managing producers.
Wow.
And they have a morning meeting, I think it's at 9:15 or so, where they have that very discussion about, okay, what are the things we feel we need to be looking at, covering, or whatever. And then individual reporters certainly submit their thoughts as well into that process about what they're seeing or what they're thinking about or what they think is most important. So it's a pretty collaborative process. I couldn't tell you exactly how many people are involved with it, but we have a total local local content production team of about 50 people.
Wow.
That isn't all news, so I don't want to misrepresent. Some of it does some side of our television program, and we have a half-hour arts and culture program on television every week. We have, there's an array, but all together, for all the things we do locally produced, we have about 50 people of producers, reporters, editors, videographer, multimedia producers.
The future, not just of your station, but of news production and news for the public. Are there people that are trying to think that out even now of, okay, with all that's going on now, how are we going to handle and what is coming in the future? Is this something that there are people who are oriented to that all the time?
I want to make sure I understand your question. What's coming in the future as far as what?
As far as how your institution will grow and continue to provide a great product. How do we get there in the future?
That's an interesting question. I mean, yes, we're always thinking about it, and yes, we're always trying to assess our place and relevance in let's call it the local news ecosystem. Because there's many players. Cleveland.com, there's Cranes, there's the television stations you've already mentioned. There's a lot of startups that are happening that foundations are supporting. The Cleveland Foundation launched something recently in partnership with the American Journalism Project called the Ohio Local News Initiative that's starting with the Cleveland Newsroom. The Gunn Foundation supports a national project called the Marshall Project, which is focused on criminal justice reform reporting. So there's all these kind of startups coming up to fill certain gaps of coverage, or to fill certain communities that aren't being served by the current ecosystem of news and information stations. And so we're in a constant assessment of what is our place and how do we best not only operate for ourselves, but really, again, live up to the service and even support some of our, one might say, competitors. You know, and because we don't always view it as competition, we view it as a more holistic ecosystem, and what is our place, and what can we best do. And in some cases, it's not even our producing of the content. Maybe the best thing we can do is distribute someone else's. You know, maybe that startup that doesn't have a big audience, but is doing great work that's unique enough or different enough from what we do. Well, why don't we partner with them? Why don't we help expand the work they're doing to a broader audience? It's a win. It's a win-win for everybody in the sense that more people hear it, the community is better served by it, you know, and that's kind of what we're looking to. So when does it happen by virtue of partnership? When does it happen by virtue of innovation and, you know, fundraising and being able to raise the dollars required to innovate something? When does it happen by virtue of our own just creation? So there's a lot of these different kind of ways to look at how we do and what we do and how we do it in the future.
The Cleveland Plain Dealer, when I came to the city 44 years ago, was one of 2 newspapers. Then we went to 1 newspaper. Now we have 4 days a week delivery of a newspaper. We have essentially a gutting of the newsroom, and what I would call a breaking of the union, and we have out-of-city ownership. Take all that into a loop and tell us what the effect of that is upon a local public radio channel.
Excellent question, because we talk about that all the time too. I mean, all of that has created an increased void, an increased absence of reporting, and coverage, and journalism jobs and reporting jobs. And so communities across the country are then faced with, well, what do we do? You know, how important is that coverage to us? How important is that function to our democracy? And more and more and more are saying, this is a loss. This is a loss of coverage, and that loss of coverage is going to impact the quality of our citizenry and ability to make good decisions on behalf of our communities and that sort of thing. And so as public media, we have not faced the same, because we're not owned by hedge funds or corporate interests or whatever. You know, doesn't mean we haven't had our own financial, you know, trip ups here and there, but generally have been pretty stable and have been actually adding jobs across public media. So while a lot of corporate and for-profit media have been retracting in journalists, we've, as a media system, as a public media system, have been adding thousands of jobs over the past 5 years. And so even now, Ideastream with this WKSU integration, this merger, our goal is to expand, to grow our journalism, you know, the number of reporting jobs and our coverage area to be more regional in focus. So Cleveland certainly, but, you know, Akron and Canton and, you know, maybe all the way to Ashtabula.
Wow.
So, you know, that's a part of our whole. We have covered 22 counties with our signal, and so how do we reflect that in the content that we produce? So yeah, it's a great time, I would say, for public media, because our business model, we're not, you know, hugely profitable. Obviously, we're nonprofits, but it's stable enough in a very volatile environment to be an area to grow, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I think the somewhat corollary question is, how about the commercial channels that we do have? Do you or maybe you can't speak for your reporters, but do you sense competition between the 4, ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC, and public radio, or is there more of a congenial atmosphere?
It's a great question. I can't speak for our reporters. I think the competition is sometimes for the story. You know,
of course.
Who gets to it first, who tells it first, who breaks it first. But I would say, generally, the nature of what we even go for, like, to cover is probably often different enough. You know, we don't produce a lot of crime report, like basically any, unless it's really just completely outrageous or whatever. We don't do a lot of crime reporting. We don't do sports reporting. There's a lot of areas we just don't touch. Not because it's good or bad. It's just we were different in terms of what we're orienting our coverage around, and we also pride ourselves on being more in depth. You know, again, spending that, not only telling you what's happening, but then following up, and going into that greater nuance or that greater context or whatever. So is it competitive? Yeah, in a sense, but in some senses, not really. and there's enough news and things going on that there's enough kind of for everyone to be involved.
So I would think this question would apply to you personally, not just professionally. The midday, late morning to up to 4 or 5 o'clock, the television has what we would call children's programming. Mm-hmm. Some of it has been around since you and I were both very, very young. Is that still a critical part of your business?
It is. It is, though. We're always evaluating how to. I mean, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 12 hours of television. I mean, prime time, right? That's when people are awake.
Yeah.
Is devoted to children's programming, and yeah, so as part of our PBS affiliation and being a member station, it's integral to the PBS system and therefore integral to us, and probably one of the most critical services we offer, because with the digital divide, right? As many of us who have cell phones and Wi-Fi or other connectivity in our homes, there's so many that do not in poorer communities across our region. And so it's a vital service of educational programming to those children who can't get it any other way. So yeah, it's a huge part of our service. I would say is distinct from a huge part of our business, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
We continue to provide it. We continue to believe it's integral, but it is maybe not. We don't generate a whole lot of revenue from that. People don't become members often of PBS because of some do, but of children's programming, they become members because they saw Paul Simon special at the Madison Square Garden, and they want to buy the 5 DVD set, or they want to get a gift of the 5 DVD set, or Rick Steves' Travel, or Downton Abbey 13 disc series or whatever. So I'm making the distinction between it being vital to our service, but maybe not as connected to the vitality of our business.
And on the radio side, we have the WCLV part, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Cleveland Institute of Music. How important is that to the two sides, the goal of providing a product and the business side?
That too, that one's a little more maybe 50-50 in the sense that there's a very passionate classical musical listener base. There's not a lot of them, but those that there are, they're passionate. I want to say maybe 75,000-80,000 a week that listen to classical music, and so of them, they are also very engaged donors as well. But from that standpoint of classical music, obviously not being a growth medium, we see it as integral to preserving that art form. And we're also, inching increasingly back into jazz as well, as a service to the community, to preserving certain things that commercial media would never touch because it's not going to be profitable for them to do so. But we're not doing it necessarily from that, whereas a nonprofit, public media station, that's not our objective. Our objective is to provide certain services to fill the gaps where commercial media simply will not operate because it wouldn't make sense for them to do so.
So when you add up all the different products that your organization provides, you can see why you need 130 people there every day to take sure the product is appropriate and correct. It's an extraordinary business, isn't it?
It is, and it's a very interesting time to be in it. With, again, everything we've talked about here today, the proliferation of all the different media outlets and the right wing and the left wing media and the independent, we don't even know where they're coming from half the time as far as how they emerge, but suddenly they're, something everyone's watching or listening to, or individual podcasters. You have Joe Rogan who gets, 10 million people a week listening to him. So it's just such an expansive space to be in, but it's nice to have the foundation of public media underneath us, so we have something to work from, and constantly be in the position to be, modifying ourselves to how we can continue to be the most relevant, service to our communities.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Mike.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed explaining the incredible process that goes into the daily product, radio, television, internet. It's an incredible business. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me and having the interest in this topic.
Sure. And thank you all for watching. Next week, we're going to talk about policing And how does an organization grow in this incredible environment we have, not just in Northeast Ohio? Good evening.